Hello, and welcome to the Waves webinar series. Today we're going to be talking about mixing jazz with waves, presented by Dave Darlington. Before we get started, I'm going to take a minute and go through the format of the webinar for anybody that hasn't done one of these before. The webinar will last about an hour and has two parts to it. The first half will be a pre-recorded presentation from Dave, where he'll go over his approach to mixing jazz as he walks you through two mixes featuring world-class players like DeJohnette, Esperanza Spalding, and other standout musicians, while going over some of his favorite Waves plugins and how he uses them in the process. The second half of the webinar will be a live Q&A. Feel free to submit any questions you have, and based on how much time there is, we'll try and answer as many of them as we can get to. You can send your questions in at any time, but you won't see them right away in the chat, as they'll first go to me, and then I'll feed them to Dave one at a time. Keep in mind that there are a lot of people online with us today, so we appreciate your patience while you wait to have your questions answered. I'm going to hand things over now to our presenter for today's webinar. His resume as a professional bassist runs the gamut, ranging from symphony orchestras to jazz funk fusion projects and live tours to New York studio sessions. He has also earned critical acclaim as a composer for his work on the HBO hit series Oz. However, the versatility doesn't end there, as he recently won a Grammy for his work as a mixer on jazz legend Wayne Shorter's Allegria album. Few people can approach music from so many angles on such a high level, and we're grateful to have him here with us to share some of the many insights he's gained along the way. So please welcome Dave Darlington.
Hi, everybody. I'm Dave Darlington. I'm a mix engineer based in New York City, and I'm happy to be here with you all tonight. Waves has been kind enough to ask me to share with you some of my processes and philosophies about mixing, particularly in the field of jazz, which I'm very thankful to them for asking me to do, and I'm happy to share with you what I can. One thing that I always think about when I think of jazz is that the musicians are so dedicated and so intensely focused that it's our job to really bring their vision of their tone to life. They've spent hours, countless hours, working on their tone and their sound and their craft and their communication with the other musicians. So our job is to really to bring that to life, not to alter it too much in any way, because they've already worked so hard on honing it. But on the other hand, we have to make a record that's exciting and jumps out of the speakers and is attractive to people. So you go into a jazz mix with that kind of a collaborative sense that you're a part of the band and you're gonna bring what they bring to life. I like to use Waves in mixing jazz because their models are very accurate on some of the old analog gear that's made the jazz sound what it is, especially back in the heyday in the 50s and 60s. The universal audio, the Neves, the compression, and the EQ is very, very accurate to what the hardware versions of those pieces can do, and I use them in the same way that I would use the hardware, which I'll show you. I've chosen a couple of pieces just to show some different instrumentations and what one might do, and it's very subtle using the plugins and doing the mixing. It's not like we're changing water to wine. We're just enhancing, slight enhancing, kind of like lighting on a stage or makeup kind of thing. So I've got a couple of really nice pieces to play for you. The first one I like to play is from Jack DeJohnette's recent album, Sound Travels, which is a celebration of Jack's composition and his entire career. And as he turned 70, his importance in the jazz world. It's got some great players. It's a traditional jazz quintet, sax and trumpet and trio rhythm section. It's got some congas, and everybody's playing great. So let's listen to the head just to get a sense of the music, and then I'll try to break down what I'm doing. So yeah, quintet with congas. What I like to do is I like to take each instrument and bus it to a subgroup, which is the ones down here in blue. So you see all the drums are going here, the perc's going there, blah, blah, blah. Piano, sax, trumpet. That way, once I've treated the individual mics, I can treat the whole instrument as a mono or a stereo pair and EQ or compress it the right way. So let's start with the drums. As you can see, it's very simple, not a lot of plugins involved. We're just doing balance, panning, ambience, and if there's any problems to solve, I might use a plugin to solve a problem or two. Here's Jack's drums. Like they say, the trick to getting a good drum sound is getting a good drummer. Of course, Jack is very careful with his tuning, and he knows a lot about recording. He's made 1 million records, so it was very easy to record him. But still, there's a couple of resonances in the room that needed to be gotten out, and a couple of tricks you can do just to make it a little punchier. On the kick, you can see I'm notching out a little resonance there. Let's see what that is if I solo it. It's just a little resonance in the front skin of the kick. So what I do is I put a very narrow Q, boost it all the way up, and just search out. Sweep through the frequency till you hear it ringing. Right there. And then get it out. Okay. That's just a non-musical frequency that's not contributing to the sound of the drums, and now it's out. If you ever need a little bottom on drums, our bass is a great thing for that. You sweep around down in the frequencies down in the bottom to just add a little tiny bit of sub, a little heft to the kick drum. The snare I just basically balance between the upper and lower mics to get a good sound. There's the top skin. Add in some strainers. Pan the hi-hat. I like audience perspective. The toms, you can see I cleaned them until sometimes, Jack plays the whole kit pretty ferociously, so there's certain areas where you just let those mics ring. Kind of contributes to the whole ambience. But in the head where there's melody, I try to clean them out. I use a little bit of compression. Just to take a little bit of that. One or 2 dBs just to help smooth out the toms. The overheads are flat. And the room mic I'm compressing quite a bit. Let's see. Yeah, you can see the 1176 input bass compression. Reasonably slow attack, fast release. Just to kind of give it some of that air, let the toms ring out a little bit. Wash the cymbals up, and just bring that up into the mix a tiny bit. I always bust all the drums to the same ambience, but I don't put ambience on everything. One thing I do with my ambient buses is pan them, follow the master panning. So if I'm sending to a tom that's on the left, the ambience will ring on the left and vice versa. So you can see I'm adding a little plate reverb to the kick, the snare, and the two toms. Nothing fancy. For the plate, I'm using R-verb. Basic plate setting, about 2 seconds. A little pre-delay to separate it from the rest of the drums. And roll off a little bit of the highs and the lows so it just doesn't muddy up the waters. Get that nice mid-range length. And it's just very subtle. I'll cut it off. You hear the snare dry up a little bit. Just to feel like the drums are really in a space and not just in a booth with mics around them. Very subtle. So the percussion section is rounded out with congas. They're also going to the plate. They didn't really need any EQ or anything. Oh, one thing I forgot to talk about on the drums, I do compress the drum bus. Let's have a look at that real quick. Just tickling it a little bit to smooth it out. Just get a place where he's playing louder. It sort of helps contain everything and make it sound like a record. Again, very subtle. That's our percussion. Just bring the reverb up so you can hear it and then back it down. So here's the bass. 2 mics on the bass. There's 4 channels because we did a fix in a different room. So we have to compensate a little bit for the change in the color. First I balanced the 2 mics without any plugins. Let's turn the plugins off a second. Okay, that's the raw bass. There's the dark mic on the F hole and the mic that's up on the neck, I'm featuring quite a bit on this record because Jack plays a lot, so we need that clarity to cut through. So let's see what we're doing. We got a couple resonances that I'm pulling out the same way. Search and destroy. Just sweep around till you find that honk. There it goes. Just pull that out because that's not your friend. Another roominess there. That's 400. That's just the sound of the room, the resonance in the room. Tuck that out a little bit. I'm using a broader stroke EQ here, a Renaissance EQ, which is you can take a bigger swath of frequencies and bring them up or down. Just boosting a little bass, some of the chest area at 1.2, and an octave above that, 2.8. I'm also high passing here at 30. There's not much down there except the thumping on the strings. And then we just round it out a little bit, 1 or 2 dBs of compression. I made a preset here. We're using the signal generator. If you don't have any peak reduction, this will just pass tone at 0. So it turns out it's about 32 over here, passing through at 0. So now I can put it on or off and just add a little bit until it starts to take some of the peaks out. Just like that. That's our bottom end. You should be able to hear the kick and the bass separately, but they should be functioning as one in the music. I always like to think of the mix being successful if I'm able to transcribe each player in the midst of all that playing. Would I be able to write down the bass line? If not, then it needs to be worked on a little more to make it clearer. The piano, I'm doing a little bit with the Neve, just warming it up at 180, and a little bit of brightness around 5K, 4.7. Let's go to a part where he's playing. So that's without, you can hear that's a little bit thin. Although it's a great piano, we get that boost in the lower mids. Now the piano's being bussed to the hall. No plate, just a little bit of hall. The hall, I'm using the Waves impulse response. One of the great things I like about the impulse response reverb is that you can load up third-party impulses. So this is actually a hall from the Bricasti series, which I like a lot. So that's our rhythm section. Here's the horn players. The basic tracks, and then we overdub some fixes. Also on a different day, so they had to be treated a little bit differently. Once again, I bust them to a bus so I can put the verb on and treat them. Horn players in particular are very sensitive about their sound. They want to sound warm and rich, but they have to cut through and be clear. Here on the sax, I'm dipping out a little bit at 2.7, and I'm warming him up a little bit at 220. He's getting both plate and hall as the trumpet. The sax I'm compressing. No, actually I'm not using anything on the sax. And the trumpet, I'm rolling him off at 5K and boosting a little bit of 100 with a tube feeling. Although I turned off the analog part of it, it still gives you that fat tube warmth. Let's hear the horns. I'll turn everything off. EQ. Ambience. The other great thing about having everything bust is that if you feel like, let's say we felt like the piano comping was a little too light in that solo, we can just go to the bus right here and just knock it up a dB. Real quick and easy. So you can see I'm not doing a lot on any one thing, but the combination of everything, it keeps the integrity of the players and their sound, but it brings a fatness and a warmth and an energy that it wouldn't have had otherwise. As far as the master fader, doing a little bit of bus compression, bus limiting, pretty quick release. In fact, lower is even better. Let's see what that does. That's without. Just bringing us a little level. So let's hear the song with no plugins. That's the raw recording. let's hear that same head with the plugins. Oh, okay. I wanted to play another interesting piece for you. It's a jazz ensemble with strings. This is from Philip Dizak's new album, End of an Era. It's the title cut, and it features a string arrangement by Charles Schiermeyer, a New Yorker who's really making a name for himself arranging strings. But what I like about it is we can use the impulse response reverb to actually put these strings in a real hall, a European concert hall, one of the best. Instead of being in a boxy studio, which they really were, not a bad studio, a good one, but now they're on a stage with real rich ambience, and they just fit right into the music like icing on a cake. So here's End of an Era, Philip Dizak. Okay, so I'll just go through the rhythm section quickly. Again, it's very similar. Kick drum, little notch. There's always, to me, a little boominess in the kick drum that we have to find and get out. And instead of the R bass extra sub this time, I'm just boosting some super low frequencies, 66, 120, digging out some of the roominess in 300, and a little attack at 5K. Drums are in the plate, panned, and there the bus of the drums is compressed with the SSL bus compressor, very lightly. On this song, the bass had a DI, so we're adding a little of the middle. Actually, the DI is pretty nasally, but it helps in this song cut through because there's so much low mid frequency in the strings and piano that we have to get through. And I'm also using the C4, the multiband compressor, to try to take out some boominess without losing the tone. Let's see what that's doing. Go to a good bass spot. Just taking a little bit of the thumpiness and the sub out. Bypassing the upper completely. And it's not working very hard in the upper mids, but it's working hard in the lower mids and in the sub to clean it up a little bit. Then let's see. I'm boosting a little bit of 700, sort of the note values in his middle octave. Piano's getting a little bottom end. Not too much on the top. 1 dB. And the piano's being sent to the hall. Warming up the trumpet down here at 100. Attenuating him at 3K, at 5K actually, which is pretty low. I'm kind of surprised about that, but he probably wanted me to warm it up. Philip is the trumpet player. Now the strings. Here's the hall. I boost it up, you can really hear it. This tickles me. This is actually the Concertgebouw in Amsterdam, a very famous, beautiful sounding classical hall. And here we recorded the strings in New York, and they're doing a recital in Amsterdam on our record. You hear that long decay. Nice. So I just wanted to share that you know, in jazz we try to put the instruments in real spaces. Plate only because plate's been around for so long, and it's one of the classic sounds. But plate and real space is the ambience of choice. Very light on the compression, very light on the EQ. It's all about balance and maintaining their tone and their integrity, and sending all the different instruments to very similar spaces, not disparate spaces, but very similar, so they can all really glue together and sound like you're at the concert.
And now let's go live to Dave, where he'll take your questions. Remember that you won't see them right away in the chat, as they'll first go to me, and then I'll feed them to Dave one at a time. Okay, let's get started.
Hey everybody, we're back live with you at Bass Hit in New York, and I hope you liked that presentation. Some great musicians, some great playing. And if anybody has any questions about what we saw or what I was doing or why, I'd be happy to check it out. So we have a question from Dan. Since jazz is primarily about the musical moment and its spontaneous nature of improvisation, how can the mixer focus on just that and not the typical I can fix it mentality? Well, it is about the moment in terms of the tracking, but obviously people do quite a few takes until they're satisfied. And even within that perfect take, nowadays there's a lot of stuff that you can do to just make everything as good as it can be without really sacrificing the musical integrity. Let me see if I can show you some edits here. You can see a punch right here on the drums, and even a little fix on a TomTom right there. I think I mentioned in the presentation that we did a few fixes on the bass. This pink track here is the bass, and then there was a couple of not wrong notes or anything, but just less incisive playing that Esperanza came back in and played. You can see she clobbered it on the retake, and then we just tried to make that match. Now I had to treat that slightly differently. You can see the levels here on the pink faders are a little bit different to compensate because it was a different studio and a different day. But we didn't eliminate the spontaneity of the music. The composition was played properly, but we punched in. I maybe moved a little timing thing here and there just to make sure everything really sounded as good as it can. And in fact, we even do some tunings with the pitch shifters here and there if it's necessary, without really sacrificing the integrity of the players. They're modern people too, and they love the fact that we can do these kind of makeup features where, make them look their best as best as we can at all times. You can see on the horn tracks down here at the bottom, we did some time aligning just to correct the groove. Back in the days of analog tape, that would have been impossible. You would just have your take and that was that. And if there was something that wasn't really great, you would have to duck the fader and get it out of the way. But just because it's jazz and it's an art form that's been around a long time doesn't mean we don't try to be modern and try to use every tool that's available to us to make the audience, enjoy the music as much as they can. So, in fact, solos have a lot of takes too. Sometimes there's 2 or 3 takes on a solo that we use an alternate overdub take as opposed to the one that was played during the rhythm section take. That's very common to redo a solo or punch in on a solo, especially if we're right there in the same room with the same mic setup and everything. If there's something that the soloist would like to improve, they do that all the time. So in mixing, I'm just really riding. You can see there's not that many level rides. Here's a little raise on the piano during the solo, because a lot of jazz musicians are very aware of dynamics and they're making their own dynamic. But what we're making is a recording, so the dynamic has to be a little bit enhanced, a little bit reined in so that it comes out of all different kinds of speaker systems in the right way. So we just give them a little helping hand without really overdoing it. Okay, here's a comment from Carlos Aguilar. How will you treat vocals in this context? Rather a plate or a virtual place? I would probably do a plate. That's kind of the traditional sound from years and years, but also one thing I did want to mention that I probably didn't say in the presentation was that in order to glue the record together, I often put the same reverbs on different people. Like, let's say the percussion is in the room, I might put a little of that room on the piano or on the horns, and if the horns are in a plate, I'll put the same plate on the piano, just a tiny bit to sort of help glue that ambience together. But getting back to vocals, there's not really much better sound than a plate, except maybe a hall. You could use a large hall or a combination of the two. I mean, a lot of times you come up with something really interesting with a little bit of hall and a little bit of plate, and blend them together, because you're going to have different tonal characteristics. The plate is going to be metallic, and the hall is going to be spacious and kind of empty in the middle and wide on the extremes. You're going to hear the tail of the hall. So that's something that we could do. A lot of times I like the IR reverb for halls because it sounds like real spaces. And if you put the horns and the piano and the percussions a little bit in that real space, it's really going to make everything knit together and be part of the same record, because you don't really want the audience to notice your reverbs. It's not like pop where reverbs are a part of the effect of the sound, like a gated reverb on a snare or something like that. You want it to sound real, but if you don't put any reverb on it, it just sounds like guys in a wooden studio, which is okay, but not slick by today's standards. So if you start listening to commercial jazz records that are out there and really start inspecting the reverbs, some of them are very, very wet and they sound great. Some of them are dry and they sound great too. It's really a taste thing. It's like, how much pepper do you want in your soup? But the reverb really helps glue the whole performance together and make it feel like it's everybody in the room playing together. Comment from Chris Smart. Has the move towards close miking everyone taken us away from the group in a room feel of many classic recordings? This is a very interesting age-old question, and yes, the close miking can get out of hand, with the miking the tops of the toms and the bottom of the toms. I always use a room mic on the drums, which let's see, that's here on track 9. The drum room. It's usually a mono, and I usually put it kind of out in front of the drummer, a few feet up and facing down at his main area of snare and hi-hat, just to get a picture of the kit. That's one mono picture, and then use the individual mics to clarify things. But you're absolutely right that all the separate mics doesn't sound like watching a group on the stage. But what it does give us is the ability to rebalance things later on. So, we're not going to go back to one mic in the middle of the room, I don't think, anytime soon. But sometimes with a horn section, you can put them on one ribbon mic in a figure 8, have them blow on either side of the mic and balance themselves in the headphones. That's a great sound. I also usually take ambient mics if I have 2 or 3 horn players in a space. Close mic everybody, and then a stereo pair up and away from them, or even a mono if it's a section kind of a thing. If you're doing a big band, I might take a mono trombone section, a mono trumpet section, and a mono sax section to give that sort of classic feel of everybody playing together. But you're right, if you listen to those old Blue Note recordings and Rudy Van Gelder recordings, it's not a ton of mics, and they sound pretty amazing. Can you please explain why you use the SSL compressor on the drum bus? I don't know if you mean why I'm compressing or why I'm using that particular compressor. I'll try to answer both. As I said in the presentation, I just lightly compress the drums. I just want to take out the overs. If he's playing a light part and goes around the kit, and then all of a sudden, bam, he bashes the kit. We just don't want that to peak out too much, so we're just gonna attenuate those transients a little bit. And if you were watching the needle, you'll see that it's never more than a dB and a half. You don't want it to be audible like in rock, where you're holding the drums down to make them sound powerful. You just want to smooth everything out. The reason I like the SSL compressor is because it's very, very smooth and very, very quick. If you notice, I keep the release on auto, so it automatically lets the sound back in quickly and transparently. You don't hear it breathing, you don't hear it pumping, and it's just very simple and easy to use. You dial the threshold back until you start to see the needle move, and when it's on the loudest part, when it's moving the amount that you want, you're good to go. It's easy to pop in and out and hear it, and I got used to it using it in real SSL boards. You would put that on at the end of your mix, and it just smooths out the whole top dynamic of the mix. And this is really, really what they sound like. There's no color, so to speak, like you're going to get from certain other brands. Sometimes you want that color, but in the SSL, it's very transparent, very quick, and it just does the jobs of keeping things real smooth. Here's a comment from Tim Barnes. If I'm tackling a 90-year-old Selmer tenor and soprano sax, what would you recommend? Is it better to have no compression on jazz sax? They have great tone, and I don't want to take any of that away. Yes, you're right, and that goes back to the point I was just making about being very, very light with the compression. On horns, I really like the CLA, the LA2A that Chris Lord made, and I keep a preset called Start. If I hit my preset right here, this is if you put the peak reduction down, this is just passing through at 0 VU, so you're not doing any gain change at all. And then I just slowly move this up until it starts to do what I need it to do. Let's see, we'll find the one on the sax and go to some sax. So you really So there you saw in the biggest note of the piece, it only went down 2 dBs. You know, I don't really like to hear compression. I like it to do its job and help me rein things in, so I don't have to do a lot of automation and rides. Jazz really doesn't. You don't sit there and ride piece by piece. You might ride sections to make scenery changes. You know, we're going to the solo, so the scene changes. Now we're coming back to the head, so a scene changes. You might have settings for the levels of certain things by that, but you don't really go through the whole piano solo and ride him up and down. He's doing his own rides to create excitement and energy, of course, and especially on a sax or a trumpet, which has a tremendous dynamic range. You only want to use the compression just to really keep it from exploding out of the speakers and being annoying. One thing about making records is you don't want the audience to have to get up and adjust things, because jazz can start really quiet and it can get blazingly loud, and in any environment you want to be able to hear those really soft dynamic moments and those really powerful dynamic moments, especially in a car where there's a lot of ambient, low end rumble and stuff from the road. You want to really be able to hear everything clearly, so the big parts have to just be big enough but not overly big. So yeah, the answer to the thing about the Selmer is just dial it in until you're just hearing it on the loudest notes. And with digital audio workstations, it's so easy to see, because you expand the track and find the biggest note and then watch it go by. So that's how I go about setting it. I look for the biggest piece and then hit 1 or 2 dBs on the loudest note. Comment from guest: you chose several different EQs and compressors. Can you share the reasons behind your choices? Someone at the door. Yeah, that's a good question. That comes actually, I guess, partly from experience. When I first started mixing, you use whatever's in the room, and then you hear other engineers go, man, you should hear Neve, or you should hear API, or you should hear SSL. And sometimes the digital audio workstation EQs are just fine. Neve has a reputation for being very accurate and very silky, but also colorful. Like it's very chunky. So one of the things I like about Waves is not only did they get the frequencies and the look of everything right, but there's a certain color that comes from those types of plugins. API has a very punchy character, and SSL has a very silky character. So you would kind of choose the EQs by what you were trying to accomplish. So on horns, you want a beefy quality. On piano, you want a silky quality. Now those are the analog emulations. We also have all the digital stuff like the Renaissance EQ, which is really, really accurate in a very, very transparent way. It doesn't add any color. You're just adding frequencies, and you're not smearing the phase or anything because of the the way they wrote the algorithm is just digitally very accurate. So if you need to boost something up or dip out a frequency, the Q10 is all, the Q series is also good for that. Renaissance is a little quicker because it's just like a 6-band parametric. But the answer to the question about the choices, it has to do with color. So from using the hardware, you kind of learn what the color of that particular piece does, and then from trying various softwares, what I found is that the waves emulation of those hardware pieces is probably one of the most accurate ones I've ever heard. So sometimes I put them on without even changing the EQ, just to run it through that algorithm to give me the sense of running through that circuit. If you notice, the most of the newer series has this analog button, which that's kind of what that's about, the sense of running it through that transformer and that circuitry to give you a little feeling of the analog hardware. It introduces that kind of good musical little bit of total harmonic distortion that a circuit would do to the sound, as opposed to a digital, which is not introducing any of that stuff. Comment from SG. How do you mix a more modern style jazz? Do you use any more aggressive settings on compression? Good question. Yes, absolutely. In fact, some modern stuff you even use distortion and stuff. If I recently worked with a group called James Farm, really, really great musicians, and they had a couple songs where we distorted the piano and the bass, and we were using ring modulators and all kind of stuff. If the artist wants you to do that, if that's their slant, they're trying to take jazz to a new place, then of course, and definitely compress harder, compress the bus harder, compress the bass and the drums harder. In a case like that, I'm usually sitting with those artists. It's more of a collaborative. The mix is more of a collaborative, creative issue because they want to change up the way the acoustic instrument sounds. So they'll be sitting here with me and suggesting things. What happens if we do this? What happens if we do that? And there's a lot of plugins that are really kind of handy for that, like the Metaflanger, and I'll pull them up real quick. Mondo Mod for panning and stuff. You can get panning on Rhodes really quickly just by doing this. I mean, the palette is really kind of endless, but the short answer to that particular question is yes, you can definitely be more aggressive with the compression. You can also be more aggressive with the reverb. Some of the more forward-looking artists use reverb as a palette. They might have a really crazy reverb on one sound, an organ or a horn or something, or they might like it really washy. I find guitar players in particular like to have long full reverbs on their sound, and I'm sure you can think of some examples of people who that's their sound. It's a big bloom, and it kind of encompasses the whole record. The audience doesn't really listen to the reverb like we do as mixers. We're making creative choices. They're just assessing the record on its value to them when it comes on. If it sounds beautiful, they're going to like it. They're not going to say, I wonder why they put that long reverb on that guitar. That's the last thing on their mind. They're just scrolling down in their iTunes or whatever going, oh yeah, I like that. That's pretty. So you kind of have to take a little bit of a step back every once in a while and say, we're doing this for effect, but what's really the total effect of the record? How does the record strike you in the first 30 seconds? Is it engrossing? Is it drawing me in? Do I want to hear what they have to say next? And that's the goal. From Avi Ludinger, I've noticed that you're cutting the waveform of the TomTom channels instead of the traditional gate plug-in hardware. Is there any special reason for this? It's just a little more accurate. It's like the gate is a dynamic piece that's running on input from the transients. And I think I mentioned in the presentation, I don't always do that. It kind of depends on the song and the player. But with the visual representation on the screen, the gates were invented when it was on tape and you couldn't see it going by. But this isn't even a really very good job on my part. This should have been faded. like that. This was kind of a quick down and dirty, but because there's so many open mics, you really don't notice that. But what it does is it cleans out, just the extra ringing. So yeah, of course you could use a gate. The C1 gate has the basic gate setting, and that's always a good place to start. No, that's not a C1 gate. Classic gate, and then you just rock your threshold up and down to where when you pass that audio, it's opening up. How about if I put it on the right thing? So that would do the same job, and it could also do it just as quickly. But then I would always be wanting to go back and watch it and make sure it was doing the right thing, or listen to it in solo and make sure it was doing the right thing. Whereas the visual approach might be quicker. From Caesar, Dave, your drums sound amazing. How do you get that brightness from the overheads on the whole mix? Well, a lot of that has to do with mic choice. I'm not really brightening up the drums per se on the overheads. Of course, this is Jack DeJohnette, so he's a great player. If I needed to brighten up the overheads, I would do that with probably a Renaissance EQ, something quick, or maybe even a Pultec. If I needed some sizzle on the cymbals, I would do a shelf right here, and if I needed some roll off, I would cut in this and figure out where the dirt was. Listen to it in solo, something very, very simple and generic. Because don't forget, a lot of the drums in general is coming from the overheads because they're only 2.5 feet away from the snare and the toms and everything. So one of the tricks of recording drums is making sure those overheads are equidistant from the action, not one higher than the other. Even if a guy sets his cymbals one higher and one lower, the two overheads kind of have to be equidistant from the center of the drum kit in order to keep most everything in phase. Otherwise, your phase is going to go wacky every time he drives around the kit. So you can see by my balances here on the Pro Tools that the overheads are just as loud as the kick and snare. That's really the crux of the kit, is bass drum, snare drum, and overheads, those 4 mics. And then I put the other mics in to taste as I need them, and the mono in as I need it. But I try to get the whole drum kit sound from the bass, snare, and the 2 overheads. Pan the overheads wide, kick and snare in the middle. See if that sounds like a good drummer. And then wait till he goes around the toms and add some toms to make sure they have impact. Comment from Vlad: do you use something on the master channel? Yeah, I like the L3 on the master channel. A lot of times I use just the mono L3 and just try to get a couple of dBs of volume from the loudest parts. But the L3 is really can be great in the multi-mode. You can really shape the final curve of the record, almost like a mastering engineer. Let me go to that fader. Here's I'm using mono in this case. Let's just go in multi-mode for a second. I'm glad you brought that up because this is something I wanted to talk about. So you see, even with 5 dBs, we're not really even hitting anything yet. We still sound pretty loud. I like to keep it at 24 bits when I bounce, because the mastering engineer is going to want that, and I don't dither it down unless this is actually if you're really mastering it to go out for yourself. So that's kind of my settings. I leave it on automatic release. The great thing about the multi is this priority button. So basically you're getting this much threshold out of all these 5 bands divided equally among the energy in each of the bands. So you can see there that I was hitting the mid-range bands a lot as I brought this down. That's a crazy amount, of course. But let's say we didn't want to lose that low warmth in the bottom. There's 2 ways to do it. You can increase the priority of this band. So now you see it's not hitting that low mid, it's hitting elsewhere to make up the same 12 dB. And another way you can do that is using this double arrow in the middle, which increases the priority and the gain at the same time. So it's the input and the output. So you don't have to do as much. I don't know how well that's translating over the internet, but that's really bringing the bass and the TomToms up a lot. Not that I would necessarily do that. I'm just pointing out that it's a really good tool in your toolbox. Let's say you have some shrill saxophones. You can prioritize them down this way, or leave the output volume up and just prioritize the compression. So now you're hitting the upper mids a lot stronger, and you can see that it darkened down the whole sound of the record a little bit. So one trick is to listen on a lot of different speakers. A lot of people in home studios, they only have one set of monitors. I have a few 3 sets of monitors. I have a small radio that I listen on, and I also like to listen into really high quality headphones. So if the mix sounds good on all 5 of those monitors, with taking into account the differences in the drivers and everything, then you can be pretty sure you're going to translate well outside. And I also bring in commercial records from my collection and put them right next to my mix and say, okay, well, gee, these guys sound really great here in their piano sound is really nice. What's different about mine? I don't ever mix in a vacuum. I would never be that arrogant to say I know exactly what's the best piano sound in the world. Let's see what the real world is doing out there. Let's be a part of our life and times. That was the great thing about some of these classic artists like Miles and Herbie, is they never just rested on their laurels. They always wanted to be a part of what's going on right now. And I think that's what really keeps jazz alive and vibrant, is that feeling of it's a great tradition. It goes all the way back to New Orleans and Louis Armstrong, but at the same time it's alive and well, and people are experimenting all the time, electronically with the instruments and electronically with the post-production to really keep it vibrant. Your mixes sound, this is a comment from unknown guest, your mixes sound to me that they have a subtle contemporary flavor while respecting the jazz tradition. Do you find that your experience in other genres like dance or R&B has contributed to your jazz mixing? Incidentally, mixes sound great. Thanks. Yeah, I feel like it's a lifetime education, man. I'm learning things every single day. When Waves comes out with new stuff, I check it out. What are they doing? How can we use it? And I'm in the room with a lot of different kinds of producers and different sensibilities all the time. The R&B guys want it to be loud, and the dance guys want it to be throbbing. So you bring a little bit of that. I feel like I tried to bring some of that to Jacques DeJohnette and to Philip, and give the drums a little more oomph than might necessarily have been in a traditional jazz thing, and vice versa. When I go to do R&B, if R&B guys are recording live instruments, I try to record them as amazingly as possible from all the things I've learned from the jazz guys about, my sax sounds a little better if you move the mic a couple inches off the bell and stuff like that. So when the R&B and dance guys use live sounds, they're like, wow, that sounds really better than I thought. So you definitely cross-pollinate and bring all the genres that you love into everything. You know, I would hate to be pigeonholed as a jazz engineer or a dance engineer. I like doing all different kinds of stuff, sometimes in the same day. So yeah, absolutely cross-reference everything. I mean, listen to the dubstep guys that are making music right now. That stuff is so loud and so creative, and they're flipping synths around in ways that people didn't even think about it 2 or 3 years ago. You know, bring that into some ambient jazz and see what you can do with that. Absolutely. Here's Chris Aguilar again. Will you please elaborate a little bit more on the approach to horns? I'm very interested on how you fatten them up without making it sound muddy. Sure. Part of that is miking. I'm not sure if I mentioned it in the presentation, but you can see here that there's 2 mics on the horns. So, I mean, that's kind of a luxury if you're in a studio that has a great mic collection and plenty of faders. A combination of a condenser mic and a ribbon mic is really pretty awesome. And I started doing that on brass, and then I realized it works good on reeds too. So I put them both in the same place so that the sound source is hitting them exactly at the same time, and just record both. And the ribbon is going to give you a warmth and breadth, a certain rich quality. It's kind of an old school sound, because back in the early days, ribbon was all there was. And then, of course, the condenser is going to give you that bright clarity and that punch and that upper mid. So by blending those two, you've really got a high fader and a low fader. And you can see here on the Pro Tools that's what I'm doing. Let's go to the trumpet sound here. I don't know how well this is going to translate on the internet, but if we solo the condenser, where are we? This is actually a fix that Ambrose wanted to do on his solo. Okay, that's the condenser. So you can hear that that's much warmer, almost gives it like a flugelhorn, French horn type of sound. So then the combination, it's seasoned to taste. Thinner, fatter. And then what I'm doing, on the trumpet bus is just a tube. This is an emulation of a tube EQ, and so I'm boosting a little 100, and I'm rolling off a little 5K, which is the bright, the belly thing of the trumpet that a lot of jazz trumpet players don't like. Almost all my friends who play trumpet always want to have a little bit of their highs rolled off and a little bit of their bottom fattened up. So, you got to be careful with the 100 down there, because there might be stuff below 100 that this is also bringing up, and that's kind of the routine for horns. Saxes in general is kind of the same thing. They always have a little bit of bite around 2 or 2.5, kind of that upper nasally area. So we're just rolling off maybe a couple 2 dBs here, and boosting a little bit of 200, 250, 270. And you could really do this with any EQ, but like I said earlier, the Neves and the Pultecs they really sound like the hardware versions of that stuff. So they sound good. Can you explain a little more of your use of multiband compression instead of just an EQ? Yeah, no, multiband compression is a tricky thing, and it takes a little while to really kind of understand it. Let's go to the C4, which is a little less complicated. So you have 4 bands here, obviously, and this is the output, boosting or cutting the output of those bands, and these are your thresholds here. So this is the default setting, so you can see when in the trumpet solo it's hitting the top band and the upper mid band. So if I increase the threshold in the upper, it's going to squash the highs even more. So you can actually warm up the sound by suppressing the highs and letting the lows go through. And that's not something I would necessarily do. This is a good trick on vocals. If you have a real sibilant vocal, you can make the high band very narrow near the top, and then squash it. So every time the singer says s or t, the high band hammers down and then lets go. You can even bypass the other bands and just squash the highs. You see how that's just tickling the top? That's taking a little bit of that brassy bell thing out of his tone, and but letting the rest of the tone pass through. So you're actually EQing, but you're dynamically EQing because you're only rolling off the highs on the notes that have too much highs. This is also a great trick for vocals and background vocals. That sometimes vocals sound great, and then suddenly there'll be a really nasally note. So you would use the middle and just set your threshold so it doesn't hit at all until the singer goes yeah, and when they hit that nasal note, the upper mid-range gets pressed down, and then use the threshold to control the amount until the passage sounds smooth. When they go past the bright note, it holds it down in just the right amount, and then let it go. It's just going to show the multiband on bass, because I think that's a really good trick. So let's say the bass is boomy, somewhere down here. We don't want it to be not bassy. We want it to do its function. But we can just use the... Okay, that's the other section of bass. Let's get to the right section. You can see how it's holding down this area between 125 and 450. Okay. So that's a good way to use C4 or multiband compression as EQ. And once you turn on your producers to this, if they get it, they really love it, because you don't have to alter the sound of the whole track. You can automate the plugin to come on in a problematic section, or you can just deal with let's say you got a recording from somewhere and the mics were not placed well, or they were in a room. You can dip out some of the roomy sound, between 400 and 500, just with a multiband, and let everything else come through. So that would be a good way to do that. Okay. This is from Jim. Hello, Dave. Thanks for this wonderful webinar. Please share what plugins you used on the string section of that last orchestra piece. Okay, on the live strings, I used exactly what I just talked about. You can see this is. I didn't realize I had done this, but this is a good example of what I was just talking about in the last section. I'm using that to just on a certain point in the program, they get a little bit shrill, so I'm just holding down the highs there without searching for the section. You can see that I'm limiting the highs a little bit so that when they really start to saw away and get rosiny, it doesn't get too biting to your ear. Then I'm rolling off a little 12K, which was a kind of a roomy sound in the studio where they were recorded. And I'm taking out a little bit of mud around 850, 900, just in that kind of a chesty area, just to allow some of the piano to cut through and some of the other stuff. Another thing I like to use on strings, which I didn't in this case, but if this was live strings with live panning and a very wide panorama, if you have only a few players, you can use the S1, which is a fantastic psychoacoustic imager. Now you have to be a little bit careful with your phasing on this, because if you put it way up, it's going to be out of phase. That's a great effect on some dance music or some R&B where you want the stuff to sound like it's coming out of the side. But so if you put it on 1.0 right here, that means you're exactly a normal natural panning. On a string section or something, I might put it up around 1.4, 1.5, just to give a little width and a little spaciousness. I'm sure it's probably hard to hear on the internet, but it's really obvious in my control room. I feel the strings going around the back of my head when I do that. So you know, this is my personal preset, 140, 150, something in there, to give it that little bit of extra width. This is also a great plug-in to compensate for things that are slightly out of balance. If the piano was recorded with one side a little bit louder than the other, and it's on a stereo track, instead of separating the stereo track, you can just tilt it and even up. Just watch your output there and even things up. Now the thing with strings is you really need that ambience. There's nothing worse than a bunch of players in a tiny room. Unfortunately, my room where I record here in my studio is not so large, so this was recorded in a large space. It sounds really good. If I do a string quartet or a string octet in my room, I have to get a really good haul on it. So you know, we're using a 4-second. This is Concertgebouw from Amsterdam, and it's a real haul. You can hear it decay. Let's solo everything. It's a lot of tracks, but they're all related. I'm gonna overemphasize the reverb so you can hear it. You can hear that's a really good impulse response of a beautiful concert space. So not that I want to hear it so obviously in my mix, but it makes my strings sound like they're not in a recording studio. They're in a concert hall, as if the jazz ensemble is playing in front of an orchestra in a venue, which you know, it just makes the record sound expensive. I'm sure this Philip did spend a little money on all his friends, the strings players that played here, but our job is to make it sound super realistic and just lush and gorgeous. Some of the really great string recordings that come to mind, like Diana Krall, Al Schmidt's recording of Diana Krall, her strings always sound so gorgeous. The Barbra Streisand records and stuff that he does. That the trick is to make it sound like it's really in a real space, and just bring that up to taste. Actually, in order to hear how much, sometimes you have to put too much, and then you go, wow, I hear the reverb, I'm noticing the reverb, I'm being distracted by the reverb. Dial it down a notch, and then see where they're laying in. So, in answer to the question about the strings, the widening effect if you need it, and a very, very natural ambient reverb, and a little bit of dialing out the mud, and dialing in the punch, kind of thing. Very subtle. If you look at my amounts, 2.5 dBs, 1.9 dB. I never EQ like that unless I'm really solving a problem. If I'm just trying to enhance things for a mix and make a mix sound better, then it's just a very subtle thing like that. Comment from Dwayne: have you completely stopped using outboard gear? Not completely. Obviously, when you use outboard gear in mixing, you have recoil issues, and the way the economy of our world today is, a lot of people are doing a lot of things for a lot less money than they used to, so they don't have time to come back and spend a whole day in the studio recalling mixes. So I have a few pieces of gear. I don't know if you can see them. I'll try to swing the camera around here so you can see them. You can see there's a rack back there with, some Eventide stuff and some filters and stuff. My front end is over here. There's a couple of Neves, some APIs, an LA2A and an 1176. So on certain things, I might throw the Neves in at 0, just route them through a hardware insert like this. Put a hardware insert and physically patch the Neves through. But most of the time, I don't find that I have to do that. I can generally get what I need out of the plugins. Now, don't forget, the plugins have been around for a lot of years now. Digital is getting older and better all the time. The algorithms today are much better than they were when digital first came out. So back in the day, it was, digital doesn't sound good. The filters are not great, and I find digital sounds amazing now, and I can also bring these mixes with plugins to the mastering room. If I'm going to a mastering room, like with Jack's album or Wayne Shorter's album, we took the physical multi-track Pro Tool sessions to the mastering room. So that took him a little extra time to master because we were there with him. He didn't just have a 2-track, but if he says, the bass is a little boomy, I could roll it out over here, or you could just bring it down. Boom. I just bring it, I bring my iLok, I bring my setup, we open it up in his studio, and we can fine tune the multi-track in the mastering, which is amazingly helpful. That's how you get, I like to think of this analogy. You from the recording studio, when you first mic the sounds, you're carrying water in a bucket from the well back to the kitchen for dinner. So you got to keep every drop of water in that bucket that you can and not slosh any over, not spill any, which in digital means dithering, truncation, bouncing in place, all that. The less of that you do, the better you're going to sound at the end of the day when you go down to CD quality 44:116. Well, actually, nowadays, iTunes mastering, you can actually stay high res all the way to iTunes, which is great for us, because all that hard work that we put into the sound is going to translate through to iTunes. And if people want to spend an extra 49 cents, they can get a high res 88.1 96K file and hear how it really sounds in the studio. That's a pretty good development. But my point was that the plugins now are so accurate and so good sounding. I mean, one of the nice things I can say about Waves is the quality of the sound. Just like you go to a quality microphone, a quality mic preamp, you got to use quality plugins that they're doing heavy math and computations all behind the scenes. All we want to do is get the results. I don't care about the math. Let them do the math and let me listen to see if I like it. And that's what I find really good about these emulations of Waves, the newer stuff like the Neves and the Pultecs and the APIs, the LA2As. They really do sound like the real thing, like the same coloration you get from driving those things a little bit harder or softer. Okay, last time for one more question. Comment from guest one more time. The name of the string piece, the artist, and the string arranger. You're going to put me on the spot with the names. It's Philip Dizak, who is the horn player, and his album is called End of an Era. It's a beautiful album, and there's strings on quite a few pieces, and the arrangements are super lush and super well done. They went to a lot of trouble in the recording, and he was here in the mixing. We went to a lot of trouble in just the panning and everything, putting the players where you would really see them if you were sitting on the stage, and not having the doubles up too loud so it doesn't sound like the same guys playing playing too many times. We really went to a lot of trouble to make it sound good, and he's a great young horn player who's going to be making a lot of noise, and he really wanted to have his pieces represented the way he heard them, so he went for it, man. And I think you can hear it.
That concludes our webinar for today. Thank you, Dave, and thank you all for taking part. We hope you enjoyed it. Have a great day and hope to see you at the next one.